life.
Okay, Julie, we weren't able to hear that opening, but Kevin, why don't you just jump in with what you normally read?
Sure. Welcome to Unfragmented, where Lee Bortons and I explore the cohesion of things believed with things done. Today is March 9, 2023. I'm Kevin Novak. Lee Bortons is our co-host. And just to remind you, last month we discussed Thank God for Bitcoin, a wonderful book, which I'm still processing in my mind. But this month, talking about knowledge and power, the information theory of capitalism, by Mr. George Gilder. Lee has a special surprise for us this week. Lee?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So I'm so excited to
For
have
some
George.
reason, you're breaking up.
Can you hear me now? No? Oh no, audio difficulty.
I hate to have him have to turn off his camera, but that might help.
Yeah, doesn't seem to be gone. Well, thank you everybody for waiting while we give Mr. Gilder a chance to get his technology working.
There we go.
Let's take it back.
Can't hear you.
Mhm.
No volume. Darn. It's the AirPods. You have to choose your system to the speaker to come through your AirPod now. And if I could tell you where to do that, click on the drop down next to the mute button, and you should be able to choose your AirPods.
Are you chatting that we can't hear him?
Yeah, I can see his mouth move. Yeah. He can hear us good, but we cannot hear him.
Oh, we want to hear him.
I know. I was reading his lips, so I can see.
Does this
You're on
help?
mute. Yes.
There we go.
Okay,
Gosh,
good.
I'm sorry. I think I touched the mute or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's okay.
you are.
All right.
Good.
Anyway,
Here we go.
Here we go. So before we start, George, I would like to know about your wife and children and grandchildren. Tell us about your family.
well, my wife was in the room a minute ago. She set up this Zoom operation for me, so I'm sitting in front of a library of books, and she's a writer too. She's written 5 or 6 books on architectures, and my new book, which I just finished today. I just submitted it, the final approved pages, to Regnery this morning after being up almost all night. So I'm a little hazy today. And the book is Life After Capitalism, and it's dedicated to Nini. And
What about your children?
and I have 3 daughters, all married, and I have 4 or 5 grandchildren, and so 2 of them are in Thailand, where my daughter is a doctor working at a red camp for part of Christian freedom.
Oh, you hit mute again. You hit mute by accident.
I didn't touch it. What is going? Something peculiar is happening. But anyway, she's and Gus and Ann are And my oldest daughter, Louisa, is an author. She wrote a book called Age of Entanglement about 10 years ago on quantum entanglement. And the subjects of her book, the leading subjects of her book, got the Nobel Prize a month ago.
Wow.
And so that was kind of a vindication of Age of Entanglement, which was judged one of the top science books of the year by the New York Times when it came out, but is now she's been there is something wrong. Maybe if I unplug this, it will help a bit. I'm really apologize. I just don't know what's happening.
No, you're
This has not happened before. This mute thing going on. I don't touch it, or maybe it's my breath. I don't know.
So
Anyway,
we understand you're with a bunch of Luddites. We're quite happy to
Yeah.
watch you struggle like we struggle.
yeah.
okay. Well, thank you.
Uh,
So what I wanted to do, if we could next, is could you tell us what was the first book you wrote and why'd you write it?
Well, the first book I wrote by myself, my college roommate and I wrote a book called The Party That Lost Its Head, which was about a critique of the Republican campaign of 1964 by Barry Goldwater, which adopted an anti-civil rights strategy, which we opposed. But my first book that I wrote myself was called Sexual Suicide, and it was the case. It was a case against the feminist movement as it emerged in the 1960s in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I was living at the time. I was running a magazine and was surrounded by Rockefeller girls who purported to be aggrieved as women. They were part of some kind of aggrieved class because although the whole world was at their feet, as far as I could see, they suffered from the patriarchy. And I started, and I wrote, I got deep in that book. It was and it really did shape much of my later works. It really maintained that the differences between the sexes are the most important fact of life, and the effort to deny them and suppress them in the name of equality or openness or virtue or opportunity or whatever it was one of the most quixotic and futile efforts in the history of society. And when a lot of it was based on I spent a lot of time in the inner city, and this was and the Black family was beginning to dissolve at that point, and the welfare state was its nemesis, and I described that process in Sexual Suicide. And today, at that time, the condition of the Black family, with 25% of kids born out of wedlock, is about the same as for white families in America today, and the Black family has 70% of children born out of wedlock and or without fathers in the home, and I predicted that this would be destructive to the society, and so that was my first book, and then I wrote Naked Nomads, which told about single men, because it was only married women. Even back then in the 1960s, there was no real evidence of discrimination against single women. In other words, single women earned as much as single men. It was, though, all the difference was between married men and married women, and I thought that that was an expression of the roles of family life, which are indispensable to a civilized society. And today, I think that the world is forgetting how to procreate, and so particularly the rich countries. And so much of Europe is going to be, there aren't going to be any Italians in Italy or Spaniards in Spain or Englishmen in England, if the current trends continue of just a collapse of
Our populations.
reproduction. Yeah. And this whole and recently I've done I helped with a book called Superabundance that is with Gail Pooley and Marion Tupy. It's a reasonable bestseller on Amazon. It's been since it came out, and it demonstrates that people, in essence, are not mouths to feed, but minds chiefly, and resources increase as the population increased. That there is no limit of material resources. The Neanderthal in his cave had the same natural resources that we have today. All the difference between our age and the Stone Age is the growth of knowledge. And so this is, Thomas Sowell said that in essence. And superabundance demonstrates it. It shows that the population has grown 75% since 1980, and the prices of all major 50 commodities that sustain life have dropped 75% during that period. In other words, they've grown massively more abundant in terms of the number of hours a worker has to spend to earn the money to buy them. These are.
So it seems like the thesis from that book is your interest in time as the measure of all things. And I would really recommend people look into Pooley's work. Did the Discovery Institute publish that book, or who's publishing Superabundance?
No, Superabundance actually was published by the Cato Institute.
Okay.
Pooley is a fellow at the Discovery Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And Pooley has contributed 2 chapters to my new book, Life After Capitalism, which is expounding in a more lapidary way, as my daughter puts it, Louisa, the themes of knowledge and power.
Mm-hmm.
It returns to this essential theory that I expound in Knowledge and Power.
Yeah, so let me tell our audience I'm gonna ask George about his next book. If you want to chat some questions after he's done telling us about the next book that he wrote, we'll pause and Julie, if you have any questions let's share them. This is quite the opportunity to be able to talk to this gentleman. Okay, and then I wanted to ask you before you left the sexual suicide book, you republished it as Men and Marriage, correct?
Right.
And why did you
Yep.
change the title?
Well, that's quite a story, and I don't know that because I'd written a book called Wealth and Poverty, which was Ronald Reagan's favorite book. When Ronald Reagan lay in the hospital having been shot by John Hinckley, and Bob Dole, a senator from Kansas who was an important Republican leader, came to pay tribute to him at the hospital bed. Dole was a critic of supply side economics, and Reagan gave him a copy of Wealth and Poverty to read, and it was a worldwide bestseller. So this was a massive breakthrough, and so then that was really the book that changed my career and thrust me into writing about information theory and technology and less about sex. So as I joke that after I got married, before I got married, I wrote about sex. After I got married, I started writing about money.
Yeah. So why the change of title to Men and Marriage?
Because even after Wealth and Poverty, all the publishers of New York refused to publish my next book, which was really a new, pretty. If you compare Men and Marriage with Sexual Suicide, you'll find that it's mostly a brand new book, and I wanted to publish it as, it was Men and Marriage, and that was my next book on all my contracts, and everybody wanted to bid for my next book, and when I delivered it, they wouldn't publish it. So it's still technically called Sexual Suicide at the bottom, but that was a pretext so I could publish it without it being part of my contracts that awarded Simon and Schuster my next book, which was The Spirit of Enterprise. And
okay, so before you start Spirit of Enterprise, for those of you who haven't read Men and Marriage, Dr. Dobson has a wonderful interview online with George Gilder when it came out. And as you can tell, Mr. Gilder here is pretty prophetic. We can ask him later after we get through the books about what's going on in today's culture. But it looks like, Julie, some people would like to ask George some questions. You want to pull one up?
I do, yes. So Kevin is asking, relative to knowledge and power, do you have an opinion about whether there should be such a thing as shareholders?
Yeah, I think, I don't know precisely what your question is, but shareholders are part owners of a company. They supply capital to the company on the basis of their knowledge, and this endows the company with support and it allows the shareholders to participate in ownership. And I think this is an important capitalist institution.
Nice.
So Kevin, you want to explain why you asked that? I don't know how's audio's doing.
You're muted, I think, Kevin.
Mhm.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Yeah, I
can hear
can
you.
hear you.
I was asking that because of the separation between information and self-interest, or information and
Oh, yeah.
ownership, and also and I don't know if you've ever read any of Gary North's materials, but
I have.
if I remember,
I've read quite a lot of Gary North. I think he's a brilliant writer.
and
Is he
I don't want
still
to
with?
misquote him.
Is Gary still with us?
Unfortunately, no. I think it's about a year
Oh.
since he passed, but what he did for us is still helpful. But I thought I remember that he opined that he didn't believe that there should be such a thing as shareholders, along with that limited liability. But I don't want to misquote him. I was just
Yeah.
curious what you thought about that.
Well, that's quite a radical position, and I don't really share it. My essential propositions in both Knowledge and Power and in Life After Capitalism, which comes out in May, are that wealth is essentially knowledge, economic growth is learning, information is surprise, and money is what remains scarce when everything else grows abundant. Money is time. And I think shareholders participate in this process and provide intelligent capital to companies. And I think limited liability is necessary in a society which is so litigious, so fraught with lawsuits and entrepreneurial lawsuits. And so it would be very difficult to create an enduring enterprise without limited liability, I think. And so although Gary North had a vision of a different kind of society and a different form of capitalism that might well have prospered under different conditions and a different culture, but in the world we live in, limited liability is a necessary shield against the unlimited veracity of lawyers.
Okay, how about Tim? You want to ask your question?
Sure. I've been seeing a lot of news lately about ongoing antitrust activity, the government looking to limit mergers in the tech world and now in the airline world. I know that's got a long history going back to the Teapot Dome scandal and everything else, but does the government have a role to play in regulating corporate activity in the market when it comes to monopolies and trusts?
I think that it does, but I think it really doesn't work very well, and it's not a very important role of government. I mean, the antitrust is, to the extent that it focuses on fraud and manipulation and various other monopolistic behavior, it has a role. But the antitrust attacks always are mounted upon monopolies just at the time they're losing their dominance and their edge. I mean, today, if we had, there's a big antitrust activity against Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, all these big social networks and everything. And my belief is that they've passed their time of dominance and a new economy is emerging today that will relegate them to a less important role, as IBM, the previous Goliath, is now no longer considered a monopolistic threat. And the other big companies in the bunch were Burroughs, Univac, IBM, NCR, and Honeywell. These were the big imperial information companies of the past that people feared as monopolies. And I don't think the Google, Microsoft, and the Apple and the current array are going to endure any longer, much longer than the others did.
Well, then you need to tell us who's next. What's happening?
Well, actually, it's quite intriguing. My current theme is the nanocosm. As the microcosm. I wrote a book called Microcosm, which is the history of the semiconductor industry, the quantum revolution in economics and technology. That was microcosm. And a key phenomenon in microcosm was Moore's law, which was a doubling of the number of transistors every 18 months or so, the number of transistors on a single microchip, and thus a doubling of computer power, or even a greater multiplication of computer power. But Moore's law is coming to an end as the features on microchips drop to a couple nanometers. And it's becoming more and more difficult to increase the density of microchips. So today we're moving into the nanocosm with new materials, and I'm predicting a new carbon age. And the leader of it is quite a fascinating man. His name is James Tour, who's a fervent Christian who inherited the laboratory at Rice University, previously held by Richard Smalley, who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of buckyballs and carbon nanotubes and various forms of carbon that have been expected for years to transform the both electronics and industry. And now Tour but it didn't happen because nobody could figure out how to manufacture the key material called graphene, which is a flat single atom sheet of carbon atoms with covalent bonds. It's 200 times more conductive than copper, 1,000 times more conductive than copper, 200 times stronger than steel, yet it's elastic as rubber. It passes signals with such a high signal to noise ratio that you can insert it in a spinal cord, in a severed spinal cord, and the spinal cord will refuse. You add it to asphalt, it's got the biggest thermal conductivity of any material, and the asphalt has no potholes in the winter. You add it to concrete, and the same structural strength can be achieved with a third less concrete. it's a revolutionary new material, and Jim Tor has now figured out how to manufacture it in volume
Wow.
for as low as $30 a ton. And so what was once a precious material that couldn't be produced in volume is becoming an abundant material, a new abundance, and it's going to launch a new carbon age. And the material, the raw material that Tor uses to produce perfect ribbons of turbostratic graphene, with the graphene you want, is garbage. You kept plastic refuse, garbage, waste, any carbon waste can be converted with this flash Joule heating process into abundant graphene. So as he says, we don't recycle around here, we upcycle. And this is a real revolution in the world economy, comparable to the Silicon Revolution I described in Microcosm. And James Tor is a fascinating man and a great Christian voice. A lot of his students at Rice are Chinese, and he says you don't have to, he converts them all to Christianity. So they,
That's great.
there's
Yeah. Hey, George, you have to live another 50 years so you can explain all these things to me as I get older. Hey, I'm curious, what do you think about the new e-fuel Porsche has made down in South America? Are you following that at all?
the what?
The e-fuel
Oh,
from
the e-fuel.
Porsche? Yeah.
Porsche this is Porsche automobiles?
Yes. Are you unfamiliar with it?
I'm completely unfamiliar. Tell me about what Porsche is doing with e-fuel. E-fuel is...
It's made, they take air and combine it with water and they fuel your car. And
a hydrogen car, in other words.
right. Mhm.
Yeah, well, there are a lot. It's costly and difficult to the processes that create the hydrogen are costly and difficult, and so I don't really believe that the hydrogen car is likely to prevail, but and the whole assumption of this need for a new hydrogen economy is the idea that CO2 is somehow a pollutant that's hurting the climate. And I think this is a preposterous mistake that was made a few decades ago, and engaged all the politicians in this ultimately quixotic, the epitome of a quixotic effort to convert us to windmills and solar panels and even hydrogen cars, which would have to have vast fuel tanks with with layers of material to enclose the hydrogen. But anyway, there are good critiques of hydrogen on YouTube that you can look up, and it's not the solution. Even if Porsche can make a car that is kind of fashionable using it.
Yeah.
I mean, Porsche operates at the very top of the market, where it has a lot of latitude about what special features it can provide to the ostentatious rich. And so anyway, but I said, but graphene is a real
Graphene's
revolution, and it's Torres helped create a company called Universal Matter, transforms garbage and plastic refuse into this valuable material.
I'm looking up pictures of it. It looks like what the Marvel superhero outfits are made out of, actually.
Yeah, they do make clothes out of it. They make tennis rackets. The first items that use graphene are not the ones that are ultimately gonna change the world.
That's cool.
So Julie, do we have other questions?
I do. I have a question. Which book do you consider your most important work?
Well, I guess I mean, what my most important work was Wealth and Poverty. I mean, that was the one that really did, you know, it was published. It was the #1 book in France for 6 months. It was, you know, sold millions of copies around the world. So I couldn't really deny its importance. It's not my favorite book. I love the Israel test. I like the Israel test a lot because I think it's and it was a reasonably successful book. It's now being published by Encounter, and it explains why Israel is still the most important country in the world.
Explain that to us.
Well, there's do you how do you respond to people who excel you in creativity, ingenuity, accomplishment, and wealth?
I want to hang out with them.
Do you resent them? Do you envy them? Do you want to tear them down? Or do you want to emulate them and take inspiration from their successes? And that's the Israel test, and it cleaves the hearts of people all around the world. And the hatred of Israel and is really an expression of envy, and it threatens our prosperity. You know, all our great companies, you know, Intel Corporation is our biggest and leading semiconductor company. It's really an Israeli company. All its initial profits came from Israel with the invention of the flash memory by Dov Froman. Its leading wafer fabs are in Israel. Its biggest profits come from Israel. Mobileye, its subsidiary in Israel. It's really an Israeli company. Google has some of its most important AI labs in Israel, and the U.S. economy really subsists on the genius of the Jews, and it's just but the Israel test is it's my favorite book, and I also tell the story of my father in it, which it gives it a personal quality that some of my other books haven't had. My father went to Germany in 1936 and saw Hitler speak, and he was frothing about Jews, and my father resolved that Hitler would have to be stopped, and he came back and did civilian flight training and became leader of a squadron of B-17 bombers, fighter bombers. They were called flying fortresses because they combined bombing with fighter defenses. And it was a kludge that couldn't really cross the Atlantic in a storm, so he was lost. And I tell that story in more detail in the Israel test.
Wow.
So could you tell us before we get off, because we only have a few minutes left, I think it was through Telecosm when you talked about the watch and what it would do in the future, and you have a nice little act that I love. Can we record-
So what we'll do in the future?
what a watch would be able to do?
Well, yeah, Telecosm and Life After Television, which I wrote in 1990, said that the computer of the future would be as portable as your watch and as personal as your wallet. It would recognize speech. It would navigate streets. It would collect your news and your mail. It just might not do windows, but it would do doors. It would open doors to your future. And I really did have the evolution of the computer rather well defined, but I wanted to call it a teleputer, and nobody has yet adopted my teleputer name for this machine that I predicted in 1989, actually.
It's great.
Yeah. Okay, and then leave us with information about your newest book that's coming out in May. What's your thesis?
It's that wealth is knowledge, growth is learning. It's all about learning curves, and information is surprise. That if everything I tell you today you already essentially know, no information is being transmitted. Information is unexpected bits in information theory. Information is surprise, and money is time. It's what remains scarce when everything else grows abundant. And these are the themes of my new book, Life After Capitalism, that I just sent to the publisher today. It'll be out in May. I sent the final pages, the page proofs went back.
Somebody did ask in that book, do you include anything about the COVID-19 and the worldwide response to it?
It's emergency socialism or emergency Marxism is a target of this book. I mean, things like graphene, the graphene revolution, where Jim Tor takes garbage and turns it into a precious redemptive metal, makes a mockery of the cover of Wired magazine that told about Climeworks, which is a popular company, which is sucking carbon dioxide out of the air, turning it into stones. So we're at a cost of trillions of dollars, ultimately, is projected, which will have to be extracted from our taxes. And when carbon dioxide, as the real scientists who haven't been bought by the politicians understand that carbon dioxide feeds plants, and plants grow and absorb it just as fast as it's produced. And that we actually, as William Happer and Freeman Dyson and Richard Lindzen and many brilliant real scientists attest, there's a greater danger of a dearth of carbon dioxide than an excess of it, with plant life all evolved in conditions of far more 10 times more carbon dioxide than we have today. We're close to a deficit of carbon dioxide that would jeopardize plant life than we are to any threat to the planet. It's any effect of carbon dioxide on the climate's already happened.
Amazing. So George, we're about out of time. I'm hoping you'll come back next Monday, and we didn't talk about knowledge and power on purpose.
Next
I will-
Thursday,
Next Thursday, I'm sorry, next Thursday. Will you be able to come back on the 16th at 8 p.m.? And I would like to talk about the words in your glossary. A lot of our
Okay.
club was saying they're having a hard time understanding it, and we want you to explain some of the more difficult words.
Okay, I'm doing another glossary for, I've been thinking about glossaries a lot, so I'd be happy to do that. I hope I can. The head of the Discovery Institute is coming to see me, and we're gonna conspire the next COSM, but I think he'd like to have me do this show. This is a good show for the Discovery Institute, so I think I can probably do it next
Is
Thursday.
that Stephen
Bring him
Meyer
with.
coming,
Bring
or
him
who's
with.
coming?
No, it's not Steve. It's Steve Burai.
Yeah,
Steve Meyer is head of the Center for Science and Culture, which does the Darwin critiques, which
sure.
I also revive in Life After Capitalism.
That is
Nice.
great. So I know Steve Bury, so say hi to him for me, and hopefully
I
we'll
will.
see both. We can see both of you next week. Would be
If he
wonderful.
wants to hop on.
Maybe I'll see we'll see what happens.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank
Thanks.
you, everybody. And if George doesn't make it back next week, we're going to go over the glossary. Thank
Okay,
you so much.
I think I can do it.
All right.
Thank
Good to
you.
talk to you.
All right.
That was
So-
Thank you,
Thank you
George.
very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.